helps if I turn my microphone on. North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. What's different about this broadcast? We bring you the news, the real news. We analyze the news for fact and bias. I point out each. I make commentary. That's not the news. That is not the news. My commentary is just my opinion, and my opinion is debatable, which brings us to debate. You can debate with me about anything that you hear on this broadcast at any time. This is an interactive news show. And what I... Seriously, Mike? Seriously? Good heavens to Betsy. You can debate anything on this broadcast. This is an interactive news radio show, and you can do it. All right? So by all means, join us as you can see fit, and I will appreciate it. Joining us on the chat room, by the way, the debate can be on the chat room that we have going on, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. You can find it there. Let's see. What do we got in the chat room? First of all, Yvonne Field wins the chat room derby today. Mike Renwee says howdy, howdy. Kelly Lyons, getting ready to go count. Now, what's she counting? Well, what's fascinating about Kelly Lyons is she works for the Oklahoma Department of Transportation. This broadcast emanates from the Fort Wells Keller Studios in far north Fort Worth, Texas. But yet, Kelly Lyons, who lives in Oklahoma, she is essentially the author for the success that we have at the Oklahoma Department of Transportation. They are wonderful human beings, and I sincerely appreciate all of their patronage of this broadcast. It means a lot to me. Let's see who else is going on. Mike Renwee. Mike Renwee is he's quite a man. Yeah, he says, "Happy Lizardo Cheney Day." Oh, might be a little too soon. Might be a little harsh. Nah. Anyway, let's see who else. Let's see. Gary Abshire, who is the world's most virulent, that's a bad word to use, the most enthusiastic Texas Rangers fan is now reveling in the fact that John Daniels, the former general manager of the Rangers, is gone. He's been gone so long, gone so long. He's fired. So we'll see what happens next year for the Texas Rangers. Let's see what else. You want Chris Woodard back? Okay. All right. Well, there you go. So speaking of Liz Cheney, former President Donald Trump's most prominent Republican critic, says she's considering a presidential run. This just hours after getting stomped in the GOP primary in Wyoming. Now, during her concession speech, a couple of things happened. First thing, this takes me a couple of minutes to warm up. The first thing that happened was she said that she called her competitor, Ms. Hagman, and congratulated her. What was interesting is that Harriet Hagman, in a subsequent interview, said no, she hadn't had a chance to talk with Liz Cheney. Oh, really? Yeah, that's thing number one. Thing number two, she evoked Lincoln when she said, well, Abraham Lincoln was unelected in runs for both the House of Representatives and the Senate until he became the president. And then I said on Twitter, Ms. Cheney, I knew Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was a friend of mine. You're no Abraham Lincoln. Then I realized I just made myself 210 years old. Anyway. Let's see. I don't often lose, but when I lose, I compare myself to Lincoln, says Marla Worley-Dockstader. Yeah. What's interesting, Nancy says that it doesn't make any difference if she runs for president, she's going to go down in flames. Yeah, maybe, but that's not why she would run for president. I have some words on that. Sylvia says hi from ODOT. TJ went to count while she's away. She's letting me use her computer to say hello. You sure are a cutie pie. You should have seen me yesterday. Man, I was in big people's clothes yesterday. I had a speech before the Republican women in Plano. No, the Plano women Republicans. I had a speech that actually was very good. I mean, that's what everybody said. I was very, very proud to go there. Okay, Mike. Yeah, she called me cutie pie. Okay, will you just stop? Just stop. See, I do interact with the chat room. All right. Did I mention the phone number? 817-379-2172. I just realized I had my water between my hand and the answer button on my phone. This would be bad. Anyway, okay. Then Mike Renwee says Frito pie. By the way, if you don't know what Frito pie is, it's a Texas thing. Okay? It's chili covered with cheese and Fritos. Okay? That's Frito pie. And by the way, don't give me any gas about Frito pie, okay? I realize I came back from mission and I gained about 10 pounds, but I'm working on getting rid of it again. Yeah. So if she ran for president, that would be like having another Pelosi at the top. Well, we'll talk more about that, Margaret, in just a couple of minutes. Liz Cheney says a 2024 campaign is something I'm thinking about. I'll make a decision in the coming months. That happened this morning on the Today Show from NBC. She did not mention whether she'd run as a Republican. There's been speculation she could mount a campaign as an independent. More about that in a moment. In the meantime, the three-term House lawmaker and vice chair of the January 6th committee says she's focused on, quote, doing whatever it takes to keep Donald Trump out of the Oval Office, unquote. Wow. Talk about Trump derangement syndrome. Trump, who backed Cheney's opponent, Harriet Hagman, has teased a re-election campaign, but not officially announced he's running for 2024. That's Trump. He faces legal inquiries on many fronts, including an investigation related to classified documents removed last week from his Florida estate. That's going nowhere. It's absolutely going nowhere. If that's all they've got big problems. It's very, very true. Very true. So here are the key takeaways according to USA Today. Cheney will launch a new organization aimed squarely at blocking the re-election of former President Donald Trump. With Cheney's loss, Trump's work to defeat the 10 House Republicans who voted for his impeachment January 2021 was rewarded. In the Alaska primary, incumbent Senator Lisa Murkowski advanced to the general election along with challenger Kelly Tshibaka. In the House race, Sarah Palin moved to the November election with challengers Nick Begich III and Mary Peltola. Former Vice President Mike Pence, another possible 2024 contender, suggested while in New Hampshire that he would consider testifying in front of the January 6th committee, which is investigating President Trump's involvement in the Capitol riot. We'll have more about that coming up a little bit later on this edition of the Wells Report. So Cheney would face a very tough path in the presidential GOP primary. She's just not up to the same. She's not up at the same level as the people that will very likely run. Okay, and what we're talking about here is we're talking about Vice President Mike Pence. Vice President Mike Pence is 5 times the professional politician that Liz Cheney is. Mike Pompeo is 10 times the qualified executive of any candidate so far based on his resume. Former Secretary of State, former CIA director, and on and on. Graduate of West Point. I mean, this guy is a serious man. And I'm watching him very, very closely. I'm also watching Mike Pence, and I'm also watching Donald Trump. But Liz Cheney needs to remember some things here, and we'll get to those in a minute. For months, she's indicated that she's thinking about running in 2024. Yesterday, she made that more of a reality by reorganizing her campaign finance account as a leadership PAC geared at preventing former President Donald Trump from re-entering the Oval Office. But if she intends to keep him out by running against him as a Republican in the presidential primary, for which neither Cheney or Trump have announced a bid, she faces an almost certain loss. And that's absolutely true. She could never, ever, ever win a Republican primary, said former Representative Joe Walsh, who served in the House of Representatives as a Republican from Illinois before Trumpism prompted him to leave the party. The base has become radicalized. There's no room for Liz Cheney in the party. Rick Wilson, co-founder of the anti-Trump Lincoln Project, said he doesn't see the traditional conservative Cheney changing the party enough to be able to win it. I don't believe the Republican Party can be revived as long as President Trump has an iron grip on it. Let's deal with a few of these things here. First of all, Liz Cheney is inappropriately obsessed with Donald Trump. She's lost her perspective on what American governance is all about. And her loss yesterday points out something that I've been saying about the Republican Party for a very, very long time. I have said that there are two political parties in the United States. There is one party that operates in spite of the American voters, and there's another party that ignores them entirely. Obviously, I'm talking about the Republican Party. And obviously, because I'm bringing it up in this context, Liz Cheney represents the willingness to ignore the voters. And that is exactly why she lost. It wasn't that she stopped thinking about Wyoming. It wasn't that. She stopped thinking about voters in general. When you're in the House of Representatives, you have to look at what the people are saying. You represent the people of the United States, not your own political politics, not the politics of your party. You represent your voters. 74 million people voted for Donald Trump, and you're going to make it the center point of your life to keep him out of the Oval Office? That's just simply ignoring the people and fulfilling what is my estimation of a Republican Party that does not care what voters think. They just don't care. They're so busy running their almost completely ineffective Republican political games. I mean, they make these very, very slick political moves that are so slick, nobody even knows what they're doing. Nobody even knows that they're making any moves whatsoever. It's truly amazing. And so this Republican Party, of which Liz Cheney is a part, has been shown, or at least the main Republican Party has been shown exactly to be what it is, which is a party that simply ignores its voters. And you get down to this, you get down to the bottom thing about this, and Rick Wilson, co-founder of the anti-Trump Lincoln Project, says that the Republican Party can't be revived as long as Trump has an iron grip on it. Trump doesn't have an iron grip on it. 74 million Americans have an iron grip on the Republican Party. As long as these people continue to feel this way, they are irrelevant. And once again, this proves something else I say. If you're willing to become irrelevant in chasing your own politics, enjoy that, because soon you're going to have all the privacy that you've always yearned for, because people are going to simply start ignoring you. This is not said with schadenfreude. This is said with pure analysis on my mind. You're listening to The Wells Report. We'll be back with more coming up in just a moment. Thanks for being here today. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. So I was just talking about Liz Cheney ignoring the people and how you simply have to represent the people that put you in office when you're working in a representative republic. So imagine how I feel right now when the main topic of what's going on in the chat room is Frito pie. Yeah, apparently Yvonne says that Frito pie was an open bag of Fritos with chili and cheese and onions put in the bag. Yeah. Don't forget the chili. Yeah. Small, but maybe not an individual. Yeah, Liz. Yeah, this is skinny Fritos or dipping Fritos, they say. I like the chili flavored Fritos in his Frito pie. Seriously, guys? I mean, I'm sitting here talking about truly things of true importance in the United States, and you're talking about Frito pie. Okay, I understand. I get it. Did I tell you yesterday that Cleo Marchese, who is the reason that I was speaking to the Republican women of Plano, the Plano Republican women, the Plano women, Plano Women's Republican, Plano Women Republicans? Did I tell you that she said that I was one of the day's that I was one of the day's deep thinkers, one of America's deep thinkers? If that's true, we're in trouble. Anyway, that being said, let's see what else is going on in the chat room here. Trying to get through all the Frito pie stuff. Let's see. Alaska has an odd system of elections. As a matter of fact, speaking of Alaska and their odd system of elections, incumbent GOP Senator Lisa Murkowski and former Alaska Commissioner of Administration Kelly Tshibaka are among candidates who will advance to the November general election, where they're going to face off against one another in the race to represent Alaska in the United States Senate. The other two candidates who will advance to the general election have yet to be determined. But Patricia Cheesebro, a Democrat, was third, garnered nearly 10,000 votes as of Wednesday afternoon, compared to Murkowski's 66,268 and Tshibaka's 61,225. That is way too close for an incumbent senator who's been in office over 20 years. Lisa Murkowski is in trouble. A total of 19 individuals competed in the contentious top four primary election, with all candidates listed in the same ballot, regardless of party affiliation. Of those on the ballot, there were 8 Republicans, 3 Democrats, 1 Libertarian, 5 Independents, 4 Callingbirds, 3 French hens. Never mind. Anyway, 2 Alaskan Independent Party candidates. Ahead of the election, leading contenders in the race included Murkowski and Tshibaka, both of whom share opposing views of President Donald Trump. One thing about Lisa Murkowski, you can say what you want about her. Whether she wins or not remains to be seen. That's up to the voters of Alaska. But she is straightforward and honest about what she feels about President Donald Trump. And she's also not lost sight of everything else involved in being a United States Senator from the state of Alaska, except maybe energy policy. But what I find very interesting about all this, what I find truly interesting about all of this, is the fact that Liz Cheney completely lost her mind about this. She just lost her mind. She has become a single-party candidate that has nothing to do with anything involving the United States of America. She's become a single-party candidate and a single-issue candidate, and that issue is Donald Trump. 74 million people voted for the guy last time. Why would you stake out that position? Unfortunately, I think it says something about her thought process. Talk about Trump derangement syndrome. Worst case I've ever seen. This is the Wells Report. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. Take part in this broadcast. Thanks for joining us today. We'll be back with more coming up in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. Your support of this show is definitely welcome. Please do. It would be helpful. Just saying. Go to patreon.com/The Wells Report. If you'd like to donate, you certainly can. And that would be awesome. Let's see. The raging debate on the chat room, which is something you can find on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, is about Frito pie. I brought this up. I didn't bring it up. Somebody else brought it up. Somebody called me a cutie pie. And then Mike Renouy said, no, Frito pie. And then I said, okay. I'm working on the 10 pounds I brought. I when I got home, I picked up 20 pounds. But that's what happens when you're not walking around in combat gear, which is it's just something that happens. Anyway, that being said, Gail says, I can't eat Frito pie. It gives me inflation, and not the kind that we're dealing with in the economy. Let's see. Okay, I'm not going to read the last part. I'm simply not. Gary says, for Yvonne's recipe, keep a Sonic spork in the car next time you have Frito pie out of the bag. Frito pie? Let's see. By the way, I don't have a Sonic spork in my possession. I have a titanium one. I have a titanium spork. You know why? Because I'm old, and everything you can do to reduce weight in your combat gear is essential. I'm just saying. All right, so here we go. Let's see. Under the word restream. What? I think I already clicked. Oh, Texas Rednecks for Frito pie without gas. Please. Let's see. Okay. Let's get back to business, shall we? So there were 10 House Republicans that voted to impeach President Trump. All right. Former President Donald Trump's vow to seek revenge on 10 House Republicans who voted to impeach him has hit pay dirt. The second House impeachment vote against Trump was the most bipartisan ever, with those 10 Republicans defecting from their party and joined with 222 House Democrats to impeach him. And President Trump went after those people. 4 of those 10 Republicans retired. The other 6 faced re-election bids, including primaries in which Trump often loomed larger than the actual opponent. Liz Cheney is gone. She's absolutely gone. Representative Jaime Herrera Butler of Washington conceded to her Trump-endorsed challenger Joe Kent, who defeated her by fewer than 1,000 votes. So let's see who else. Peter Meyer, the most recent pro-impeachment House Republicans to lose a re-election bid, lost to John Gibbs, a former official in the Department of Housing and Urban Development during Trump's presidency. Gibbs echoed Trump's claims about the 2020 presidential election. By the way, once again, USA Today says in that sentence, Gibbs echoed Trump's baseless claims about the 2020 presidential election. Okay. Once again, that editorialization, that's bias. All right. What they should have said was what I said to begin with. Gibbs has echoed former President Trump's claims about the 2020 election. This bias is insidious. And that's why I pointed out, there's no need for it. Just report the facts. It's what we do here on the Wells Report. If I can do it, USA Today can do it. I know I guess it's less inflammatory, or I guess it's less sensationalist, and maybe arguably less successful. You don't have to worry. USA Today doesn't have to worry about calling people to go to patreon.com/USA Today and make donations. The Wells Report's a different kettle of fish. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm wrong. But I just don't believe that you need anything more than straight news reporting. Yes, there's commentary, but that's not news reporting. I'm the only guy that does this job that makes that abundantly clear, that my commentary is my opinion and it's debatable. Okay? Whether it's about terribly important issues of the day, things that have drastic import around the nation and the world, or whether that debate centers on Frito pie. Dan Newhouse, pro-impeachment House Republican from Washington, successfully staved off a challenge from Trump-backed Lauren Culp, who espoused Trump's claims of election fraud. Washington is one of two states in the country that's Washington State, so obviously liberal, and that's how that worked. Representative Tom Rice in South Carolina. He was a pro-impeachment House Republican. He was defeated by challenger Russell Fry in a June primary. Fry won President Trump's endorsement in large part because of Rice's condemnation of the former president. Representative Dave Valadao of California, the only pro-impeachment House Republican who has not faced a Trump-backed primary challenger in the election season. President Trump was, without question, a driving force in the catastrophic events that took place on January 6th. That's what Valadao said in a statement about his vote to impeach President Trump. Representative Anthony Gonzalez of Ohio, he was the first of four House Republicans to announce plans to retire after their impeachment votes. While my desire, his quote was, while my desire to build a fuller family life is at the heart of my decision, it's also true the current state of our politics, especially many of the toxic dynamics inside our own party, is a significant factor in my decision. That's what Gonzalez said in his statement, alluding to the House GOP's loyalty to President Trump. Is it loyalty to President Trump, or is it loyalty to 74 million Republican voters? These guys are losing lock on what they're there for. They're losing lock on what it actually means to represent their states. That's why they're losing. And then there's Representative Adam Kinzinger. He's the only other Republican on the January 6th committee. Since announcing his retirement, he has consistently criticized President Trump. Donald Trump's conduct on January 6th was a supreme violation of his oath of office and a complete dereliction of his duty to our nation. And now he's quitting. Representative John Katko of New York was the third House Republican to announce his retirement after the impeachment vote, citing a desire to spend more time with his family. Great news, another one bites the dust. Katko from upstate New York is gone, said President Trump. Representative Fred Upton of Michigan was the last of four House Republicans who declined to seek re-election after voting to impeach Trump. Even the best stories have a last chapter. This is it for me. He announced his retirement on the House floor in April. Let's see, Upton was Michigan's longest-serving member of Congress, but his district was redrawn to pit him against another Republican incumbent, Representative Bill Huizenga, who did not vote to impeach President Trump and earned the Trump endorsement. Now, what about other Republican voices? Well, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, this from Fox News, is silent about the defeat of Representative Liz Cheney. He previously supported the anti-Trump Congresswoman against her critics. Cheney lost to her Trump-backed primary opponent, Harriet Hagman, by a massive margin. She got crushed, 66 to 29%. Whoa. The result was widely expected after Cheney became one of the most vocal critics of former President Donald Trump and has now dedicated her entire life to defeating Donald Trump in 2024. Representatives for McConnell did not respond to a request for comment from Fox News. A representative for the second-ranking Senate Republican, GOP Whip John Thune, also did not provide comment in response to a request from Fox News Digital. The Congresswoman not only voted for Trump's impeachment in the days following the attack, but Liz Cheney became one of two members of the House January 6th committee to investigate it. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi appointed Cheney after blocking Republicans put forward by Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy of California, who then refused to name any GOP committee members. Now, I brought this up last time. Last time we talked about this, I brought it up, and I'm going to bring it up again. You see, the Republican Party they have a real problem. It's being referred to as chaos in the Republican Party. During the Trump administration, there were probably slightly fewer Republicans that hated President Trump than Democrats. But there was a huge faction of Republicans in office that despised President Donald Trump. Indeed, worked to sabotage his administration in many, many ways. So the Republican Party, regardless of what they may say, or in this case, not say, what they're doing is they're clinging to truculent silence because that is the wise political move. Remember earlier this hour, I was talking about these slick political moves that Republicans pull off because they're just slick political moves. They also don't have the stones to stand up for what they actually believe because they know that if they stand up and say that President Trump is the worst possible candidate for the Republican Party, they will lose their seats as well. Because the Republican Party has changed. The people who voted for Donald Trump fired the Republican Party in doing so. President Trump, and what can only be what I consider to be a magnanimous gesture, remained as a Republican. And I don't know why. If there was somebody that could ignite the conservative party of the United States, it would be Donald Trump. The conservative party of the United States exists kind of as a vestige of American politics. But if President Trump had left the Republican Party and took 74 million voters, he wouldn't get them all, but he would certainly get at least 70 million of them. If he would leave the Republican Party and form the conservative party of the United States, the Republican Party would be finished because they don't know what they want to be. They want to be power brokers. The mainstream Republican Party just want to be power brokers. They want to be this middle bipartisan generating party. They want to be the party that can, basically pick winning issues as they come up and support those issues instead of actually standing for something beyond those issues, actually putting out a platform and sticking to it. They believe in bipartisanship. Well, American politics is not built that way. We have a two-party system. You cannot win a tug of war from the middle. You can't. And the Republican Party is dealing with this, and the silence of McConnell and Thune proves it. Absolutely proves it. And so this is where we stand. This is where we stand now. The President of the United States represents a sea change for the Republican Party who got fired, the Republican Party, by his election in 2016. And the Republican Party refuses to realize that in the old business context, hey, the cheese is moving. Yeah, who moved my cheese? President Donald Trump moved your cheese. And you better wake up to the reality that you are going to have to, and this is something else I've said. This is something else I've said. You have to realize, and I said this years ago. I was invited to speak before a congressional delegation. It was classified. I will not tell you who, but I said at that time, 7 years ago, that if you didn't start doing the people's business, that if you didn't start responding to the American people with solutions instead of the manipulation of issues, that a populist would arrive and sweep past them like they were tied to a stump. And that is exactly what happened. I warned them. I told them. And that is a true story. And I have to be perfectly honest with you, it's still true. The mainstream Republican Party is inviting their own extinction by refusing to believe that the people of the United States know more than they do about how this country ought to be run. And that hubris, and in this case, I have to point it out, ulterior hubris, is this schism, this divide in the Republican Party. You have to serve the voters, not yourselves. You have to serve your constituents, not your party. George Washington warned us about this. He despised political parties. And now we know why. Because they end up not doing the people's business. And so in the case of Donald Trump, The people will do Republican business for them, and they will be left out in the cold. They are begging for irrelevance. And McConnell and Thun's silence prove everything that I say, at least in my mind. That's just my opinion. It's debatable. So debate. A17-379-2172. A17-379-2172. Or you can join us on the chat room. Let's see, you've got half a dozen chats there, and none of them are talking about Frito pie. I may be winning the argument. Okay, anyway, truculent. No, you don't have to go to Google, Gary. Find out what truculent is. Get your Merriam-Webster Collegiate Dictionary, and you'll be fine. This is the Wells Report. Back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. Thanks for joining us on this broadcast. Make sure you hit like, make sure you share this with your friends, and make sure you hit subscribe. Hit subscribe. Please subscribe to this. And like I said, if you want to support the show, go to www.patreon.com, patreon.com/The Wells Report. So now, an obsession by Liz Cheney is essentially making itself apparent, not in her loss to Harriet Hageman, but in her future plans politically. I have some ideas on what that might be. Let me give you a little bit of news from Fox News. Immediately following her loss to Harriet Hagman in Wyoming's Republican primary, she made her statement about 20 minutes after the polls closed. Representative Liz Cheney of Wyoming unveiled her next move, launching a new organization with the primary goal of keeping former President Donald Trump from regaining the presidency. The group, called The Great Task, gets its name from a phrase in the Gettysburg Address. Cheney invoked Abraham Lincoln calling for the Republican Party to go back to its roots. We have to get this party back to the principles and values on which it was founded, said Liz Cheney in an interview on the Today Show today on NBC, claiming it has lost its way in focusing too much on Trump and his cult of personality. A cult of personality has another name: strident, popular support. Okay? That's not a cult of personality. A cult of personality is when you surround yourself with sycophants. Okay. I just realized that I've given Gary another thing to look up. SYCOPHANTS. Sycophants. Those are your cheerleaders. You build an echo chamber of people that tell you everything you say is brilliant. And before you know it, you start to believe it. And then you distance yourself from the people, which is disastrous in a representative democracy. So what's her play? What is her move? Political experts on both sides of the aisle, both parties, say she has no chance for a Republican nomination to the presidency in 2024. So what is she going to do if she wants to keep President Trump out of office? She's going to run as a third-party candidate. That's what she's going to do. She is going to do to Donald Trump, or at least she hopes to do to Donald Trump, what was done to George H.W. Bush by Ross Perot, who, by the way, owns an entire airport and an industrial park located roughly right over there. Alliance Field, that's the Perot family. So she's going to run as a third-party candidate. There are two circumstances, like the Great Task. That's not going to be the party that she runs on. She's probably going to go with the Forward Party. Have you heard of that? Where a bunch of middle-of-the-road everythings, both Democrats and Republicans, and keep in mind that Liz Cheney asked for Democrats to vote for her in the primary to save her political career, which shows the hypocrisy of both Liz Cheney and the Republican Party. That she would do that was absolutely outrageous. But she's going to run as a third-party candidate, and she's going to try to siphon off votes. I don't think she's going to be successful in siphoning off any votes from Donald Trump, should he choose to run. Now, there will be other candidates that might do that. But if President Trump gets the nomination of the Republican Party, and it's really hard to see that he's going to fail this time around for 2024, if he chooses to run, Liz Cheney is going to provide something that she really doesn't want to provide to the people of the United States. And that is the coup de grace, the last gasp of the mainstream Republican Party. If she runs as a third-party candidate, I'm going to predict that she gets less than 10% of the vote, less than 10% of the popular vote. She'll get no electoral college votes. She doesn't stand a chance. She does not stand a chance against President Donald Trump in 2024, even as a third-party candidate. And what that will prove to everyone is that the mainstream Republican Party is dead. That is the only argument against Liz Cheney running as a third-party candidate. But that's what she's going to do, because if she's willing to ignore the people of Wyoming, if she's willing to ignore the people of the United States in her poisonous obsession with defeating Donald Trump, then she's going to ignore the Republican Party's pleas to not expose the fact that the mainstream Republican Party is past tense. They refuse to acknowledge it. Meanwhile, President Trump and his voters, or should I say it the other way around? President Trump's voters and the former president himself, they will expose the end of this so-called moderate republicanism, the end of the rhino, the Republican in name only. And all those people will be gone as the party changes into a populist party focused on solutions, focused on a government that works for the American people instead of working in spite of us. That's the way I see it. What do you think? Give us a call. 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. This is the Wells Report. See you next hour. And there you go. So please, by all means, stick around. We'll be back. North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. What's the Wells Report? If you're new, the Wells Report is about the news, the real news. It's about analysis. We analyze for fact and bias. We point that out. There is commentary. That's not the news. Simply my very debatable opinion. And it's debate. Anything you hear on this broadcast is wide open for your commentary, whether it's on chat, at Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, or whether you call me on the telephone. Telephone's right here. Call me on the telephone, 817-379-2172. If you're new, thanks very much for giving us a look. If you think there's value in this broadcast, pass it along. Because what we do here is what the lamestream media, by the way, I think I'm the first person that brought that up. Okay, I think I can prove it with my tweets. The lamestream media will not do the job that we do, which is to bring you the news without fear or favor. I don't care whose political ox gets gored. And regardless of what you may think, this is not a partisan broadcast. The only reason it sounds partisan is because I follow the politics of this show are plain. The Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights, and the Federalist, which explained all the other three. If you haven't read the Federalist Papers, which is actually the Federalist, if you have not read those essays, sit down and do so. Because they will explain what they were thinking when they came up with this, based on all the things they had learned about governance of human beings around the world up until the late 18th century. And they said, we're not going to make those mistakes here. They quite literally embraced what they called the New World. Liz Cheney wants to go back to the Lincoln or origination of the Republican Party. Well, I don't believe it. What I will believe is this, is I believe that those four very important things, Declaration, Constitution, Bill of Rights, Federalist, I believe those things will be the rallying point of the next great American century. We need to put our politics down. We are listening to dividers, people who set us against ourselves for political sake, for politics' sake, and that is all. We have to set that aside. We have to cool things off, and we have to listen to each other. When I talk about debate on this broadcast, I'm serious. Now, I'm not interested in arguments. I'm not interested in tit-for-tat gotcha games. I'm interested in debate. It's not an issue if I get something wrong. By the way, if I do get something wrong, we will fix it right here. I got computers all over the place. And if you bring something up that I get wrong, by all means, let's talk about it. I will look it up. And if I make a mistake, I will correct it. In fact, I have a correction from yesterday. I said that the unemployment rate, those not seeking jobs or those, the actual statistic is new unemployment claims had gone up according to the last set of numbers we got about inflation and all that stuff. In point of fact, it was flat. It was flat. So somebody pointed that out, and I didn't have a chance to deal with it then, but I do now, and therefore I'm fixing it. So the point of the matter is that this is interactive. So by all means, interact, please. Let's talk about the FBI. There are two stories that are going on here. One, typically, is the actual story. The actual story being the FBI appears to be completely out of control and have essentially abandoned the law and its enforcement and chosen political sides. That is where we find the FBI at this point. But what we have here is we have a situation where the GOP is being spoken of as a party going after the FBI. I don't believe that's the case. I believe that some members of the GOP, certainly not all of them, are trying to figure out just exactly what the FBI is. It cannot be a federal law enforcement agency and a political action committee. It has to choose between the two. A lot of people point out, well, the FBI was pretty much political from the beginning. All you have to do is think about how the originator of the FBI, how that beginning part of the FBI was extremely political. As a matter of fact, what they would do is they appointed themselves the litmus filter of America, of what is American and un-American. And they would essentially spy on Americans, build a file, and put those files down in front of various politicians. A lot of those politicians got visits from the FBI and got to see their own file in order to push politics. That's true. So, in order to essentially remake the FBI, which is something that I think all of us can pretty much agree on for different reasons, in order to remake the FBI, we have to do exactly, I think, what I just said, which was force the FBI to choose between being a law enforcement agency or a political action committee. The law enforcement agency has a future. The political action committee is going to be done away with. All FBI agents, all FBI special agents, all FBI staffers are not political. As a matter of fact, many of them decry the political FBI that we currently see. I choose to believe that these were FBI directors, assistant directors, and so on that were co-opted during the Obama administration. When the Obama administration took the Department of Homeland Security, the IRS, the FBI, the CIA, and turned them into political action committees, turned them into tools. The certain term of art that we're using now weaponized all of those executive branch agencies, EPA, for the sake of politics. Those politics, held in abeyance, indeed stopped cold during the Trump administration, now reappear under the Biden administration, arguably because the same people that ran the Obama administration are running the Biden administration. If you believe that Joe Biden is making any decisions of any import whatsoever, I believe you might want to reevaluate, because he's not. It is a presidium. Who are those people? We don't know. The only real thing that you need to keep in mind is something that I, again, said in the run-up to the 2020 election. If you vote for Joe Biden, you're not voting for Joe Biden. You're voting for the people behind Joe Biden. And none of those people, if you want to talk about a major issue with the 2020 election, the people running the Biden administration were not on any ballot in any state in this union. Who are they? We can only guess. But it's certainly not Joe Biden. Certainly not. So the FBI. One issue is the FBI is in a position where they have to choose between being a law enforcement agency and a political action committee. The other aspect is that there are people trying to make political hay out of the fact that the GOP is looking very hard at the FBI and have done what Republicans always do. If we get power again, by God, we're going to look at the FBI. I don't believe it. That is meaningless rhetoric based on their history. The Republican Party is very, very fond of saying, we're going to take care of this as soon as we have the chance. We're going to do it. And we still have Obamacare, don't we? After them saying 73 times that they would obliterate it at their first opportunity, which they failed at. They also failed at remaking the IRS, which would have changed the calculus for the Obama administration. If they had changed the IRS into something that it should be, which is an agency that collects a very simple flat tax from everybody in the United States, a regressive one, those people making less than $150,000 a year, they pay 13% or 12.5%. Those people making $150,000 a year to, say, $500,000 a year. They pay 10%. Those people making beyond that, they would pay 8%. And there would be a limit. I would say the limit should be somewhere around $80,000 that any given American can pay as income tax, period. But then again, I would also couple that with campaign financing law, that only individuals, only American citizens and individual American citizens can make contributions to American political races, campaign contributions. No more political action committees, no more corporations endowing political races with hundreds of millions of dollars. No more of that. Let's make it 85,000. Okay? Let's make it 85,000. By the way, Alan Schaefer brings up a good point that I just did about the FBI. And this is the political aspect of that. Alan says, Republicans back the blue when they go after their opponents. They sing a different tune when the blue comes after one of their own. Okay. Well, the thing about that is that's political. But let's look at the reality, Alan. And I want you to think with me here. I want you to think with me. Is an FBI directed by politics a good thing or a bad thing? And I want you to answer this, Alan. I want you to answer this. Forget about partisan politics for just a moment. Is an FBI directed by politics a good thing or a bad thing? As a matter of fact, you can call me, Alan. I'd love to talk to you. I've been very impressed. I've been very impressed with the commentary that you share here. You know, because you get the fact. Alan, by the way, in case you don't know, Alan is somebody who has different politics than I do. And I have several of my friends and people that I don't know, but I consider my friends, like Alan, who bring up very important points that we have to discuss. So, Alan, I want you to do this right now. I want you to answer me. Is an FBI directed by politics a good thing or a bad thing? Okay, you're not sure what I'm getting at. Okay, well, let's take a simple example. Okay, Hillary Clinton violates the Espionage Act 16 times. It's Section 7. It's an open and shut case with her open server in Chappaqua, which was silly. If she had put that server inside the skiff, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But she has TS/SCI information in her server, which was accessed by foreign intelligence agencies. And she got no trouble whatsoever. Nobody said a word. In fact, that anybody that brought it up they said, "My God, that's just ridiculous." Well, now that President Trump is being accused of the exact same thing, my God, they're trying to nail him with what? The Espionage Act. That is a clear dichotomy. There's another word that Gary has to look up. Yeah, she had SCI files, TS/SCI. She did. Anyway, that's a clear dichotomy. So that's a perfect example. That is political law enforcement. Is that good or is that bad when it comes to the FBI? Answer me. I'll give you time to talk, to think. We'll be back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. Thanks for joining us on the broadcast. You can do so via chat, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch. You can also call us at 817-379-2172. So we're talking about the FBI, okay? The circumstance that we have here is we are talking about the FBI and what I believe a watershed, a fork in the road, if you will. The FBI has to choose whether or not it's going to be a law enforcement agency or whether it's going to be a political action committee. The law enforcement agency that follows the evidence of the day, makes charges as appropriate, has a future. The FBI as a political action committee is going to be absorbed into the Department of Homeland Security, which may or may not make it better. It probably would make it worse, but let's just say that as the FBI won't have a future as a political action committee. There are two schools of thought on this. One is political. Well, the GOP is looking at the FBI only because Donald Trump had an outrageous search of his private residence. Also, by the way, they say that it's a political circumstance because the Republican Party is certainly not going to follow up on their promise to look into the FBI as soon as they get power. That's one that I added. The other side of this, that's the political side. The other side of this coalesces down to a question. Is the FBI directed by politics a good thing or a bad thing? Which is it? Okay, so Alan Schaefer, who is on the other side of the political question, says, well, if the FBI is political and Hillary Clinton did so as accused, why didn't Trump-appointed FBI Director Christopher Wray go after her at the directive from Donald Trump? Because it's the FBI. Because the FBI is political. They defied President Trump because he called for that very thing. And the FBI simply ignored him. And yes, that was Christopher Wray that made that decision. Also, by the way, one of our other Democrat friends, Langston, said SCI files are more sensitive than top secret. Well, though there were TS SCI files. Okay, I don't know whether the NPR article that I just referenced for you actually had that information, but there were TS SCI files in that server that Hillary Clinton ran. Yes, this was bad. She should have been prosecuted, not persecuted. President Trump is persecuted. Hillary should have been prosecuted. She actually should have. But you know, the reticence of that is as follows. Do we actually prosecute? And this was something I brought up then, and it's going to sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. But do we really want to prosecute a former first lady of the United States? Do we really want to do that? Now remember, they had her dead to rights on 16 counts of violations of the Espionage Act because there were 16 TS-SCI files on her servers, and they were accessed by foreign intelligence services. They had her dead to rights, but they let her go. Now, strangely enough, Donald Trump is being accused of the same thing, and they're talking about indicting him for it. So there you go. So once again, I'm going to go back to Alan, and I'm going to say this. Is an FBI directed by politics a good thing or a bad thing? You tell me. 817-379-2172, or you can continue on chat. Okay? And no charges were brought against her. No persuasive evidence of systemic deliberate mishandling of classified information. The problem with that is that the actual section of the Espionage Act, Section 7, says that intent is not considered in the violation of that law. So again, is an FBI directed by politics a good thing or a bad thing? Please answer me next. We'll have more of this broadcast coming up in just a moment on it is the Wells Report right here. Stay put. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Thanks for joining the broadcast. Make sure you hit like. Make sure you subscribe. Please subscribe to this broadcast. We're on Monday through Friday from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. Central Time, 3 to 6 Eastern Time. And we report the news. We analyze the news for fact and bias. I make commentary. That's not the news. It's debatable. And that's why we have debate. And I have to say that when I say that everybody is welcome, including people who disagree with the perceived politics of the Wells Report, by all means, join us. We finally have one of these debates that I've been looking for a very long time from people on the other side, actually questioning some of these things in a way that is not an argument, that doesn't descend to ad hominem attacks. Because what I'm trying to do is get through a real debate here. The debate is the FBI. The GOP, the headlines are the GOP is looking at the FBI for some remediation because it's become a political action committee. They believe it's become a political action committee. What I'm asking is the FBI directed by politics a good thing or a bad thing? A173792172. Tell me whether it's a good thing or a bad thing and why. In order to clarify what I was talking about with the FBI being political, Hillary Clinton makes a mistake with TSSCI documents on an open server that was accessed by foreign spies. Nothing happens. She violated the Espionage Act, Section 7, 16 times. 16 TSSCI pieces of information. Okay, so that's one hand. What happens to her? Nothing. The FBI says she's incompetent and just throws it all away. Donald Trump, on the other hand, has boxes of ink and pen actual documents sitting in boxes in Mar-a-Lago. And some of those are TSSCI. Now, the president maintains that he declassified them. That is his right. He is the definitive source of what is classified and what is not. Hillary Clinton didn't have that protection. And oh, by the way, Donald Trump did not have them accessed in Mar-a-Lago as Hillary Clinton did with that server that was out in the open. That was silly. She was the Secretary of State. And she put all that information on an open server. She didn't have to. She was trying to maintain her privacy. She tried to keep it a great big secret. Langston says this. Here's a good question. What was my response, JD's response, to the Hillary server controversy? I can tell you exactly what it was. I was expecting James Comey to charge her with 16 counts of violation of Section 7 of the Espionage Code. I was expecting him to prosecute her under those terms, essentially doing the same thing with Hillary Clinton that they had done with Sandy Berger. I was expecting that to happen after the election. But before the election, James Comey stepped up and said, nah, none of this matters. She's just dumb, which was not the case. That was a calculated move. Everybody knows it, etc. So that's a political response by James Comey. Now we have the other response. Well, doggone it, President Trump violated the Espionage Act and should be prosecuted. And they're thinking about throwing an indictment his way. They can't do it. They simply can't do it. What was my response to the Hillary server controversy? That was my response. I was expecting her to be charged. I was expecting her not to go to jail. I said, we don't want to send a first lady to jail. But now we fast forward to where we are today. They want to send a former president to jail. And they can't do it. They simply can't. So in a vacuum, Hillary Clinton should have been charged, and she should have faced the music like Sandy Berger did. And if that had happened, then I'd be saying the exact same thing about President Trump. I'd say the exact same thing. If he violated the law, then he should be prosecuted. But you can't have it both ways. That's the politics of the FBI. That's a political action committee disguised as the FBI. the FBI disguised as a political action committee. If it was a law enforcement agency, they would have charged Hillary Clinton. Then they would have been able to charge Donald Trump, unless the various federal courts agree with President Trump that he is the ultimate arbiter of what is top secret and what is not. If the president believes that the documents that he had were unclassified and he was able to prove it in court, then that's that. Hillary Clinton didn't have those same protections. Donald Trump does. Now, will it go to court? Probably. Will it get to the Supreme Court? Maybe, but I don't think it will. It'll probably get to a circuit court, and that'll be that, and the Supreme Court won't hear the case. Because what that points back to is politics again. And this is a disastrous mess that we find federal law enforcement involved in. You can't play politics. And the decisions made during the Hillary Clinton era are now influencing the decisions made in the Trump era. So in a vacuum, hey man, you have top secret SCI material in your private possession. Bye-bye. And that is a perfect example of what we're dealing here. So, is a politically directed FBI good or bad? And that's what I'm asking. The FBI, Justice Department, and the NIH have all been weaponized. It's not new. Been going on for years. It's a bad thing for them to be political because they can't be impartial. Correct. Alan says, I don't buy your statement the FBI is directed by politics. That wasn't my statement. I didn't make a statement. I asked a question. I'm asking you a question, Alan. Is an FBI directed by politics a good thing or a bad thing? That's what I'm asking. It's a simple question. He goes on to say, you're asking questions based on a false premise, which is the old talk radio bit of asking yes or no questions. That's just the beginning of the conversation, Alan. I have other questions, depending on yours. I have other questions. And the simple difference between this radio broadcast, and everybody else's broadcast is that I ask questions. I don't make blanket statements. I ask questions. Simple question. Is a politically directed FBI a good thing or a bad thing? Gail Marlowe points out that Hillary destroyed BlackBerries and bleached her email. She's guilty, okay, but once again, you're innocent until proven guilty, Gail. And there you go. Gail says the FBI can't pick sides. So yes, it's not good for the country. Trump did classify them. He took out a black Sharpie and wrote D before classified. That's what you do. Actually, the actual process is to draw a line through the previous classification, which is usually a stamp, TS/SCI. And then you put that through and then you reclassify it. Sensitive, unclassified, whatever you say. If he wrote declassified before it, that's okay. It's not the exact way you're supposed to do it, but that's actually the way it's done. It's really crazy. You know, I mean, I looked at that and I'm sitting there going, are you serious? They just make a mark through the classification and say unclassified? That's exactly what they do. I mean, I think it's archaic. All right. The best part is she didn't know how to tell whether it was secret and confidential. That's garbage because she got a complete education on I'm talking about Hillary. She got a complete education on handling classified documents. She had to. She was a Secretary of State. Let's see. Trump has always been transparent with the people. The political elites don't like it. Okay. Gary says the Clintons are charmed. It's frustrating. They should have been locked up for Whitewater. Well, we don't know. Once again, that was an Arkansas thing, and the Arkansas people saw it differently because they kept sending them back to office. Once again, I'm not going to argue with the state's voters. Max Guadiano answers the question in the way that Max Guadiano would answer the question. Is an FBI directed by politics a good thing or a bad thing? He says it's a bad thing. See? Simple. Let's see. FBI should not be mixed in politics. Completely correct. Trump cannot declassify SCI files. He can. He absolutely can. Is it good? I'm not sure. Okay, am I comfortable with a president who was elected by the people, especially a guy that has, I mean, the first political office he was ever elected to was the presidency of the United States. The guy wasn't even a dog catcher as an elected office before he became the president of the United States. Am I comfortable with him declassifying stuff as he sees fit? No. Does it make me nervous? Yes. Do I have any idea what those documents are? No. But he can. He can. He is the ultimate arbiter of classified and non-classified information. Alan says it's a hypothetical question because in reality it doesn't exist, and I don't deal in hypotheticals. You're being evasive, Alan. You're being evasive. I am not making statements about the FBI being political or not being political. I'm asking you whether a politically directed FBI is a good thing or a bad thing, and you don't want to answer the question. You're being evasive. It's not a hypothetical. Let's see. There is a manual that guides on how to declassify material. In point of fact, anybody can classify any document that they have in their possession. I can, and I have. I absolutely have. I know the rules. I have classified material because the person that owns the document or the intellectual property can classify it or not based on their own point of view. You can do it. You can classify material. Let's see what else. Ignorance of the law does not excuse from the consequences of breaking the law. Correct. No law enforcement group should be directed by politics, says Anne. Just like the president of Brazil said, if this had happened in his country, the American media would say it was a coup. JD, the Sharpie reference on declassified was a joke, referring back to Trump taking out a Sharpie to redraw the route of a hurricane on a map. Well, that's true, but did you know that a president with a Sharpie, actually they don't use a Sharpie, they just use a ballpoint pen. They just use a ballpoint pen. As a matter of fact, I think I've seen declassified material that was struck through with a pencil, for Christ's sakes. I mean, it's archaic. Okay. All right. So let's see. That is what we will await as information as revealed in due time. You don't try criminal investigations. That's true. We don't. Certainly we don't. Okay. Let's see. All right. So the GOP is now looking at very, very hard and making some very, very strong statements regarding the FBI. This from CNN. Former President Donald Trump's GOP allies in Congress were eager to defend their leader after learning last week the FBI carried out a court-authorized search of his Mar-a-Lago property in Florida. I want you to note something. I have not been critical of the search. I'm critical of the fact that after the search, the DOJ doesn't want to release the affidavit in toto. That's a cover-up. Oh, we don't want to compromise the identities of the witnesses because we might have trouble getting witnesses in the future. In this country, you get to face your accusers. Period. Release the affidavit. Because I'm pretty sure that they don't want to release the affidavit because the affidavit and the actual warrant don't agree. And that is a hanging curveball for every single legal analyst in the United States, and they're in trouble. They cannot release the affidavit. As a periphery, the idea that you can dox your political enemies invalidates the protection for these witnesses. And believe me, as far as compromising witnesses for the future, if everybody in the United States that was willing to be a whistleblower, et cetera, had to identify themselves, there'd be a lot less whistleblowing, especially during the Trump administration. A lot of these whistleblowers, so-called whistleblowers, didn't actually know what they were talking about. They were relating hearsay information. And so what you have to do is you have to start with a real case. And that means you have to start with real witnesses. And you sit there and say, are you willing to be a witness? And you say, yes. That means that your identity is going to be known. These are important concepts. Let's see what else. redact the names there. That was easy. I don't want them to redact the names. I don't want them to redact the names at all. I want people that testify against a former president of the United States to stand up tall before the man and square their shoulders and take responsibility for their testimony. That's what I want, because I want it to be real. If you're going to take down anybody, a high public official, if you're going to take down anybody, you better be willing to stand up for what you're saying. You better be willing to stand up for your testimony. And if you're not, then I say it's baloney. Actually, I use a different word. I use a different word than baloney. It rhymes with wool skit. Can't believe I said that. This is the Wells Report. Back in a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. At long last, what I've always wanted on this broadcast is occurring. Real Americans of various political ideologies having a reasoned conversation about a very important issue. In this case, the FBI. There are a lot of really loose statements being made. Okay? Let me give you some examples. All right? Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia demanded the FBI be defunded. No, if the FBI cannot be remade into an objective, nonpartisan, a realistic federal law enforcement agency, it shouldn't be defunded. It should be abolished. That's the first thing. Senator Marco Rubio of Florida equated the lawful search with something we've seen many times from third world Marxist dictatorships. That is true. That is true. Representative Elise Stefanik, the third ranking Republican in the House, slammed the search as un-American. House Minorities Leader Kevin McCarthy decried on Twitter what he called the Justice Department's intolerable state of weaponized politicization under the leadership of Attorney General Merrick Garland. Those are loose statements. They are. They're inflammatory. But the FBI has brought it on themselves. We must have an objective, straightforward federal law enforcement agency, not a politically driven secret police. The difference is that the president who sits atop all this, excuse me, who sits atop all this, if indeed we have an objective FBI, an objective DHS, an objective CIA, if we have objective federal agencies, an objective IRS, an objective EPA for crying out loud. If we have all these things, then you have an administration. If you have a secret police dictated by politics, if you have an IRS dictated by politics, right down to armed enforcement officers, then you have a regime. The Biden administration is going to have to figure out what they want to be called. If you want to use the DOJ as a political tool, that makes you a regime. If you want to get back to the blindfolded Lady Justice with the scales of equality, then you can have an administration. Which do you choose to be your legacy, President Biden? By the way, one of the great things about this broadcast is the professionals come out. A professional whose name will remain, whose name I will not speak. The President of the United States is the only person who has absolute classification authority. Okay? Beyond the fact that this man is a professional, I'm not going to say anything more. But that is completely correct. Excuse me, please. Let's see. There's breaking news. Alan Weisselberg, who was one of former President Trump's most trusted executives for decades, is expected to admit to 15 felonies and take the stand at the Trump Organization trial. Actually, I heard something different, Alan. I heard that he was not going to take the stand regarding anything having to do with the organization. That's what I read. I was planning on getting to that, by the way. Let's see. The witch hunt on Trump will never end. Such a liberal waste of time. All they've got is to invent the crime like the KGB does. That's the way it looks. That's the way it looks right now. This is what happens when you, like I keep saying, politics poisons everything. It absolutely poisons everything. And it's just an insufferable shame that that's happened to the FBI. It's actually malevolent when it happens to the IRS. It's even more malevolent when it happens to CIA and the Department of Homeland Security. And by the way, who do we blame for the Department of Homeland Security? Is it that awful President Obama? No. It was the unintended consequences of President George W. Bush. I remember talking about the creation of the Department of Homeland Security under the Patriot Act. I said, I'm real nervous about this. I believed in John Ashcroft. I believed in George W. Bush. But I said, who is coming after these guys? Who is going to be their successor? And what were they going to do with the Patriot Act? Well, now we know. You want to talk about abolishing things? First thing we need to abolish is the Patriot Act. Man, I think the Department of Homeland Security is a mess. I absolutely do. Jesse says the Weisselberg stuff is Trump's personal business, not his actions as president. That is true. That is true, but it is worthy of discussion, Jess. Let's see. If the IRS was objective, they wouldn't be buying guns and ammunition. The DOJ is the Gestapo coming after conservatives. What was your reaction to Hillary's server breach? I'm sure you were very forgiving. No, I wasn't. What I said was I didn't want to send a first lady to jail. but I was expecting her to be charged and handled basically like Sandy Berger. I have the worst luck listening to JD on the road. He literally goes to a break, 30 seconds of talking. No, I really don't. It's actually many minutes. Let's see. So there you go. That was a great discussion. That's the kind of discussion we want on the Wells Report. We want to talk about the important issues of the day. The FBI has a choice. They can either be an objective, straightforward, honest federal law enforcement agency, or they can be the secret police. They're going to have to choose. You're listening to the Wells Report. Back with more in just a couple of moments. Thanks very much for being with us today. Alan, Langston, Kelly, everybody. Great debate. Thank you very much. North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. Greetings, my name is John David Wells. We bring you the news. We bring you analysis for fact and bias. We make commentary. That is not the news. And then we have debate, which we had a great debate last hour regarding the FBI. Let's talk a little bit about that. And let's have more of those. Just because our politics may be different, good conversation cannot be a shall we say, an obstruction to honest thought. Because that's what we need more of in the United States, in my opinion. We're in a situation where the divisions in this country, the polarization has never been worse. What we need to do is we need to overcome that. We're being egged on by dividers. We have to stop that. It's essential. And I'm hoping that at some point we can get back to reasoned debate, not argument. Reasoned debate is what this country needs, in my view. So let's have it. And by the way, if you didn't see last hour, make sure you go back and get it. It's an important hour. It really is. If you've been looking at the FBI as either well within its rights and so on, or not within its rights and essentially taking itself down a road from which there is no return, then go back and look at that. Share it with your friends. Subscribe to this broadcast. Hit the like button. Please, by all means, do that. It's important. And by the way, if you would like to support this broadcast, once again, we certainly do appreciate that as well. Please do. Go to patreon.com/The Wells Report. www.patreon.com/The Wells Report. We'd love to have you. So we were talking about the FBI last hour, a great conversation, because there were people on all sides of the issue. And great questions were asked, and we got to go through all of them. And now let's move forward with a little bit more of that conversation, but from a different perspective, a more political one. Mike Pence very likely will run for the presidency in 2024. I am very much interested in hearing what he has to say. I want to know what he thinks. The only real problem that I have with Mike Pence has to do with the fact that he is such a superb professional politician. It's hard for me to not think, and this is based on no real fact, because I haven't seen Mike Pence make a bad move since I've known Mike Pence. And that goes back to him being a governor, for crying out loud. The guy is just a superb politician. The problem with where we stand now with Mike Pence, and where I stand right now with Mike Pence, is that politicians are the problem. We need neighbors. If there is a politician that can be a neighbor, certainly Mike Pence, at least at this moment, qualifies. Actually, I have seen him make a bad move. During the vice presidential debate with Kamala Harris, he kept interrupting her. That was bad. He shouldn't have done that. That actually disappointed me. So I have seen him make a bad move. One. The next time he debates, he just needs to stand back and wait. That goes all the way back to 1960 when John F. Kennedy debated Richard Nixon. A fascinating debate. John F. Kennedy essentially treated the debate like his opponent wasn't even there. On television, the people watching on television thought that John Kennedy easily won that debate. The people listening on radio thought that Richard Nixon won that debate. It was fascinating. It was just fascinating. But Kennedy was composed and calm and, yes, very presidential. And that is what Mike Pence needs to do, just as an aside. This comes to us out of the New York Times. Former Vice President Mike Pence today called on Republicans to stop attacking the nation's law enforcement agencies over the FBI's search of Mar-a-Lago. Congressional Republicans, including members of leadership, have reacted with fury to the August 8th search, which is part of an investigation into Mr. Trump's handling of classified material. Some lawmakers have called to defund or destroy the FBI. If indeed the FBI is politically driven, it should be abolished. If it is a fair and objective, straightforward enforcer of law, that FBI has a future. The FBI as the secret police will not stand. So the congressional Republicans are making these brave statements like Republicans do, right up until the point where they actually have to follow through on those statements. That remains to be seen. Speaking at a political event in New Hampshire, Mr. Pence said that Republicans could hold the Justice Department and the FBI accountable for their decisions without attacking the rank and file law enforcement personnel. I have a comment on that. I am a member of the Texas State Guard, and I have to say this. Nothing that I say regarding the Texas State Guard has anything to do with the Guard itself or the Texas Military Department or the Texas Adjutant General or any of those offices. Anything that I say regarding my participation as a Texas State Guardsman is I am solely responsible for that content. I want you to understand that. I need to make that very clear. But we have very varying political ideologies, and which is good, which is absolutely good. But as a part of that, we also have an oath to not just the Constitution of the United States, but also the Texas Constitution. An order that we consider to be outside of either the Texas Constitution or the Constitution of the United States is not an order we have to follow. Now, I have a real problem with people as highly trained as FBI agents not looking at that warrant and saying, this warrant is overly broad. Now, at the end of the day, are they compelled to follow through with that search warrant? Yes, they are. I said a few days ago that the FBI, the people that actually conducted the search, that was their job. They are not the enemy. The enemy is the way it was done and whether or not that level of intrusive craziness, which is just my opinion, whether that was warranted. So far, it doesn't look like it was at all. But then again, we're waiting for the affidavit, which now the DOJ says they won't release. That's beginning to look like a cover-up. That's a mistake. By the way, in case you're wondering, federal magistrate, he's not a judge, he's a magistrate. Federal magistrate Bruce Reinhart has scheduled a hearing tomorrow to determine whether or not he will release the affidavit. President Trump has called for that affidavit to be released unredacted. That is something that I favor. As I said last hour, if you're willing to testify against a former president or anybody else, then you don't get to hide behind some sort of protection about your identity. You square your shoulders and you stand tall before the man in your report. You do. And that's that. If we did that, we would have a much better country. There would be a lot fewer unidentified theoretical sources for all kinds of real silliness that has damaged this nation. And that, of course, is a media issue. We'll talk about that another day. But getting back to the rank and file, at some point, someone has to say, okay, there's something wrong with this. And they have to push back. That's what an objective, straightforward federal law enforcement officer and agency would demand. And regardless of whether or not you believe that this is straightforward or whether or not it was a huge mistake, it doesn't make any difference. You have got to apply the law equally and fairly, which means that if somebody made a mistake years ago, then you don't get to change the rules with something that is similar but not identical in these times. That's why an objective viewpoint, an objective enforcement of law is a protection for everyone. Everyone. Hillary Clinton should have been charged with 16 counts of violation of the Espionage Act. She should have gotten a wrist slap. She probably should have been convicted. She probably should have had, just like Sandy Berger, had her security clearance removed for 3 years. She probably should have been fined a few hundred, well, not $100,000, $150,000, and get some community service. If they had made that decision, before the 2016 election, then if indeed Donald Trump loses a case that he espouses as saying, I declassified any information in my possession, if he loses that, then he should be likewise prosecuted. But this is what happens when you play politics with Hillary and you try to cling to this objective ideology with someone in the political opposition. That's the mistake they made. And they made it years ago. So the rank and file, sure, nobody gets to threaten an FBI agent. Nobody gets to threaten the cop on the street. Nobody gets to threaten law enforcement. You don't get to send them a nasty email. You don't get to send them a death threat. That's a crime. You should be prosecuted for it. What you should do is you should redress your grievances with the government of the United States, and you have representatives to do that. And then you follow up with those representatives. Are you taking care of this? And if they fail, you vote them out of office. It's one of the great things about House of Representatives members. They are all up for election every 2 years. That's the American way. So Mr. Pence said Republicans could hold the Justice Department and the FBI accountable for their decisions without attacking the rank-and-file law enforcement personnel. True, but that rank-and-file law enforcement personnel, they have a stake in this too. If they see something that is improper, they are compelled by their oaths of office to say so. But you don't get to threaten them. You don't get to threaten the AG. The Attorney General. You don't get to threaten these people. You don't get to threaten the director of the FBI. They should chase you down and throw your butt in jail. Jail prison. There's more. It's coming up in just a couple of seconds. Mike Pence making some very good statements. We'll continue with those in just a couple of moments. This is the Wells Report. News, analysis, commentary, debate. Back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. We're discussing Mike Pence and his call for the Republican Party to cool it with their criticisms of the FBI. He did point out that the GOP could certainly hold the DOJ and the FBI responsible, but lay off the rank and file FBI. I agree completely, beyond the caveat that says, look, if you've been ordered to do something that is outside the purvey of the Constitution and your oath to it, then it is your duty to oppose it. That's a very important difference between this country and every other country on the planet, especially when it comes to federal law enforcement. Now, Alan, who took part in what I consider to be a brilliant debate last hour, and by the way, if you missed it, by all means, go back and get it, okay? Go back and get last hour's podcast. Because let me tell you something, it's smoked. It is exactly what this broadcast is supposed to be. News, analysis, commentary, and debate. Okay? That's the way it is. By the way, Jube just points out, hey, the rank and file, they end up being the leaders. That's true. It's absolutely true. And the rank and file, to have the protection that Mike Pence is asking for, to have that protection, they have to obey their oath of office all the way up to the top. And there is no way that James Comey, Andrew McCabe, and the rest of those guys can say that they were strictly following their oath of office. They just can't say it. And that's where things began to break down. And by the way, James Comey's defense of Hillary Clinton broke the chain of command. The AG, the Attorney General, should have said those things, not James Comey. It cost him his job, by the way. Allen brings up the Justice Department is arguing regarding the release of the affidavit that it could hamper its investigation and potentially harm those involved. We don't deal with potential. We deal with reality in federal law enforcement. We don't deal with potential. This could happen, so we can't. What do you mean this could happen, so we can't? He goes on to say affidavits typically contain information addressing why authorities think there is evidence at a certain property and other details about an investigation, including sometimes the identities of witnesses. Okay, let's go ahead and look at that in the light of day. The Constitution of the United States has been amended many times, 27 times, I believe. The first 10 are called the Bill of Rights. The Fourth Amendment of the Constitution is as follows. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. The biggest criticism of the search warrant at Mar-a-Lago is that it is overly broad, and everybody is saying it. The DOJ says, well, it might harm our future investigations. Well, there's a problem with that too. Nowhere in this, no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched or the persons or things to be seized. Mentions anything about that warrant and the affidavit or oath being kept under wraps because it might harm the investigation. That doesn't say that. If it is an oath or an affirmation that establishes probable cause, that's public property. The affidavit should be released, unredacted. It doesn't say anything about protecting the identities of witnesses there. That's secret police garbage. The Fourth Amendment is plain. The DOJ is violating the Fourth Amendment every day they don't release that affidavit. Period. Especially in this case. More coming up in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. This is the Wells Report. Thanks very much for being a part of our broadcast. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you hit like. Make sure you ring the bell so that you know when the broadcast is on the air. Join us every day, Monday through Friday, from 3 until 6 Eastern Time, 2 to 5 Central Time, 1 o'clock until 4 in the Mountain Time Zone, and noon to 3 in the West Coast. Make this a part of your day. There are 3 podcasts every single day. They're all important. We only deal with the real issues of the day. We report the news. We analyze it for fact and bias. There is commentary, not the news. That's not the news. It's just simply my point of view, my opinion. And it's debatable. And that's the debate. And we're doing a great job today. If you want to debate anything that you hear on this broadcast, you can call me at 817-379-2172, 817-379-2172, or you can join us on the chat. Somebody on the chat said when we were talking a little bit about the actual federal exposure, the federal law exposure that Hillary Clinton faced regarding her open server in Chappaqua. Somebody said, well, wouldn't it have been great to see the Clintons in orange jumpsuits and leg irons stabbing trash along the highway in a chain gang? No, it wouldn't have been great. First, it would essentially drive the United States of America into third world banana republic status. And it would have also set a precedent for the very same kind of prosecutions for Donald Trump. We don't throw our ex-presidents or first ladies into jail. We don't put them on chain gangs. That's why all of this is so improper. That is why Peter Navarro and leg chains and irons, seriously? Talk about an FBI overreach. Oh my God. That was horrifying. Strip searched. Okay, that's not federal law enforcement. That is oppression. It is oppression born of tyranny. We don't do that with our government officials unless they are actually guilty of something. Peter Navarro isn't guilty of anything. You're innocent until proven guilty. Was he a threat to the FBI? No. Just like President Trump, he was in contact with the FBI before they slapped him in leg irons, for crying out loud. They've had people standing out in front of their houses in their underwear. They've tipped off CNN that there was going to be an arrest. Paul Manafort, Peter Stone. That's ridiculous. That is political law enforcement. Throwing ex-presidents in jail and having them on a chain gang? No, that's third world garbage. We have to stop that. Speaking of federal agencies out of control, this is a long time coming, and I'm glad to see it. Being reported today on CNN, big changes are coming to the United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, which recently celebrated its 75th anniversary as the nation's lead public health agency. Well, it stopped being the nation's lead public health agency a little bit sooner than you think. Most people think that the politicization, whatever. The politicization of the CDC began with COVID-19. No, it actually started with bird flu. More about that in a minute. CDC Director Rochelle Walensky met with senior leadership at the agency this morning to lay out her plans for overhauling how the agency works. Listen carefully. She plans to remake the culture to help the agency move faster when it responds to a public health crisis. Good. She also wants to make it easier for other parts of the government to work with the CDC and wants to simplify and streamline the website to get rid of overlapping and contradictory public health guidance. Not so good. Let me explain what I'm talking about. The CDC, as it is written perfectly here in the CNN article, is the nation's lead public health agency. She wants to make it easier for other parts of the government to work with the CDC. No. The CDC needs to issue public health information. objectively, without politics. It is a health organization, not a political action committee, which is exactly what it turned into during COVID-19. So no, she doesn't have to make it easier for other parts of the government to work with the CDC. What the CDC needs to do is determine the actual public health emergency or public health issue, study it, release their information, and everything else should be downstream of that. What we saw in COVID-19 was we saw the CDC start to do that and then change their reporting, even their facts, to reflect the political message, which was improper. The politicization of a public health crisis. A lot of people lost their jobs. A lot more people should lose their jobs over that. And certainly the CDC absolutely needs to remake itself into a public health organization instead of a political action committee, which is what it turned into during COVID. Absolutely improper. So no, I'm not interested in other parts of the government reaching into the CDC and altering what the CDC reports say. It should be the other way around. The CDC issues a public health report, narrow in scope, with their recommendations and their proof, and everybody else works with that information. So nobody gets to go into the CDC and tell them to do their job. My goal is a new public health action-oriented culture at CDC that emphasizes accountability, collaboration, communication, and timeliness. I look forward to working with the incredible people at CDC and our partners to realize the agency's fullest potential to benefit the health and well-being of Americans. Good statement. That's all the CDC should be doing. There should be no political razzmatazz going on with the CDC under any circumstances for any reason. Period. Staff was notified by email. More than 12,000 people work at the agency, which is headquartered in Atlanta. The changes will be aimed at improving the culture and restoring public trust after the agency's acknowledged missteps in response to COVID-19. The reforms follow a period of review and introspection at the CDC. In April, Walensky announced Jim McCrae, an administrator of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, would lead a one-month review of the agency's COVID-19 response efforts. At the same time, she charged 3 of her deputies to scrutinize operations and recommend strategic changes. Walensky has been meeting with groups of staff in person as employees return to their offices after months of remote work. Look, what happened with the CDC, and I was on the front row. I was on the front row of this. When the CDC started reporting on COVID-19, everything was fine. Everything was just fine. And then the political message was at odds with the CDC message. Should the political message have changed? Yes. But that's not what happened. No, the CDC altered the way it was reporting the facts. We got day by day data on cases and deaths and so on and so forth, and all of a sudden that stopped. The CDC abdicated its responsibilities for public health reporting to Johns Hopkins University. And I said at the time, when the CDC says something, we can hold them accountable. How do we hold the Johns Hopkins accountable? Johns Hopkins can play politics with public health information. The CDC cannot. And oh, by the way, no one should play politics with CDC information. Period. The CDC must be responsible for its own data, and it had, by God, better be good. It better be accurate. It better be objective. It better be straightforward, and it had better be totally absent of politics. And that's not what happened during COVID-19. The changes will be aimed at improving the culture and restoring public trust. The reforms follow a period of review. We talked about that. The new marching orders come after significant stumbles at the agency in response to COVID-19. The U.S. had little capacity to test for infection during the early months of the pandemic, largely because the agency released a flawed test to public health laboratories. Can't do that. Can't do that. It is better to wait until you have something that actually functions than it is to throw something out there in response to politics. My God, there are no testing. Because what they were trying to do is they were trying to point at President Trump and some sort of failure of leadership. The persons who need to lead when it comes to public health, not the presidency, the CDC. And so what ended up happening was that politics reached in and said, come up with a test. I don't care what it is. Get it out there. Wrong answer. By the way, that kept the nation blind for months to the extent of the virus's spread. The agency had also been criticized throughout the pandemic for issuing public health guidance that some saw as confusing and ineffective. No, they actually issued pretty good public health guidance. That was, again, warped and poisoned by politics. Can't do it. Can't do it. Many felt that it wasn't moving fast enough to respond. Well, you can't just jump and do knee-jerk reactions to public health issues. That has to be a scientific project from the get-go. For 75 years, CDC and public health have been preparing for COVID-19, and in our big moment, our performance did not reliably meet expectations. That's because you were looking at politicians for answers that you should have been providing the politicians, not the other way around. Walensky will bring in former HHS Deputy Secretary Mary Wakefield to the CDC to oversee the reorganization. Among the key moves, the Division of Laboratory Science and the Office of Sciences will report directly to the CDC director, a shift aimed at making them more accountable and speeding the results of their work to the public. The agency will also create a new Office of Intergovernmental Affairs, a hub where the state health departments, and other federal agencies will interact with the CDC. CDC doesn't need to interact with other federal agencies. The CDC needs to interact with the state health departments. Period. Other agencies can take the issues, can take the information from the CDC and do with what they choose. Do with it what they choose. But they don't get to have any input on CDC action. Period. Period. Walensky will convene an executive council that will determine agency priorities, track its progress, and weigh in on budget decisions. Well, okay, that's all right. The agency will start a new equity office, which aims to increase diversity both in the CDC's workforce and add that lens to its public health activities. That is a mistake. Because what Walensky is doing is reintroducing politics to the CDC. You get the best minds in public health, and you put them to work with the CDC, regardless of their skin color, regardless of their gender. There are plenty of brilliant people that fit all those categories. But when it comes to public health, we have to have the best. Walensky is playing politics here, and that's a mistake. That is an absolute mistake. CDC also plans to create a new online mechanism for pre-publication delivery of science. Will give its website a makeover by streamlining and simplifying its guidance to the public and healthcare providers. That was a problem for this media man. That was a problem for me. I had major issues trying to navigate the CDC website. And as long as the simplification process doesn't make a mistake in withholding information, I have no problem with it whatsoever. Simplifying would have made my life a lot easier. But remember, I was dealing with a whole bunch of garbage that was being changed for political reasons all the way through. All the way through it. And I would point out when Johns Hopkins was taking the lead on public health when it was supposed to be the CDC. Walensky also plans to ask Congress to grant the agency new powers, including mandating jurisdictions share their data. Good. Currently, CDC depends on states and counties to voluntarily do that. Bad. She's also going to ask for new flexibilities in the agency's funding. Right now, when the Congress earmarks money for the CDC, it has to be spent on specific programs. That created more than 150 individual budget lines that fund the agency. It's a problem when a public health emergency comes along, true. In 2014, when Ebola began, Dr. Tom Frieden, who was the CDC director, had to borrow money from other parts of the federal government to respond. We literally didn't have the money for plane tickets and per diem to send staff into the field. I had quite literally 20 times more flexible dollars as New York Health Commissioner than I did as a CDC director, said Frieden in an interview with CNN. CDC is changing. Good. Back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. If you happen to be new to the Wells Report, I want to tell you about my childhood. Not all of it, of course. Just the part where my dad worked for the space agency, NASA. He was a government contractor all my life. He started tracking, as it turns out, Big Bird spy satellites, okay, and ended up at Mission Control in Houston, Texas. He was one of those guys that sat there with his headset on and made life and death decisions every minute of every day for the Space Shuttle project. When they retired the space shuttle, the entire agency sort of descended into darkness. They finally were able to put some things together and come up with what they called the Space Launch System with the Orion space vehicle. Their new program to go back to the moon, which is something that we should have done at least 20, if not 30 years ago. We're finally getting to go back. Artemis 1 is going to take flights on or about August 29th. That is 12 days from now, 11 days. The Saturn V, which took men to the moon in the late 60s and early 70s, was 365 feet tall. The Space Launch System is 322 feet. It came out of the Vehicle Assembly Building late Tuesday night, drawing crowds of Kennedy Space Center workers, many of whom were not yet born when NASA sent astronauts to the moon. It took 10 hours for the rocket to make the 4-mile trip to pad 39B. That, by the way, was one of the pads used for the Apollo project. They're looking for an August 29th liftoff for the lunar test flight. Nobody's going to be aboard. It's going to be empty. There are going to be some mannequins, and there's some silly cutesyism that's also going to be a part of it. Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. The capsule will fly around the moon in a distant orbit for a couple of weeks, then head back to a splashdown in the Pacific. The entire flight should last about 6 weeks. The flight is the first moonshot in NASA's Artemis program. The space agency is aiming for a lunar orbiting flight with astronauts, 2 years, and a lunar landing in 2 years, and a lunar landing by a human crew as early as 2025, much later than NASA anticipated when it established the program a decade ago. The years of delays have added billions of dollars to the cost, which is unfortunate. This, by the way, from the Associated Press. Now, for the first time since 1972, we're going to be launching a rocket that's designed for deep space. This, according to John Honeycutt. He's NASA's rocket program manager. NASA's new SLS moon rocket, short for Space Launch System, is 41 feet shorter than the Saturn V rockets used during Apollo a half-century ago, but it's more powerful, which is hard to believe. Using a core stage and twin strap-on boosters similar to the ones used for the space shuttle, but a lot bigger and a lot more powerful. When you look at the rocket, it almost looks retro. It looks like we're looking back toward the Saturn V, said NASA Administrator Bill Nelson, who's as old as dirt and knows what he's talking about. Sorry, Bill. But it's totally different. New, highly sophisticated, more sophisticated rocket and spacecraft by a long shot. The Apollo spacecraft actually, pretty much the entire Saturn V stack had less computing power than this telephone. Equally by a long shot. I'm talking about every vehicle. I'm talking about the lunar lander. I'm talking about the command module. I'm talking about the service module. I'm talking about the instrument ring on the Saturn V. I'm talking about all that stuff. Add it all together, less than what's in my pocket. So yeah, that spacecraft is going to be a heck of a lot more capable. None of the Apollo crews believed they had more than a 50-50 chance of surviving their flights. Those odds have increased dramatically because of the technology that we now have. 24 astronauts flew to the moon. 12 of them landed from 1969 through 1972. The agency wants a more diverse team and more sustained effort under Artemis, named after Apollo's mythological twin sister. Nelson said something that's very, very important. This is a test flight. It's just the beginning. And by the way, we did this with Apollo. The first several Apollo flights, all the way up until Apollo 7, actually, were unmanned. And Apollo 6, if you don't know what happened with Apollo 6, you ought to read up on it. It was an amazing flight. We almost lost the whole vehicle. This was the rocket's third trip to the pad. A countdown test in April was marred by fuel leaks and equipment trouble, forcing NASA to return the rocket to the VAB, Vehicle Assembly Building, for repairs. The dress rehearsal was repeated at the pad in June with improved results. And now, in 11 days, the launch window opens, and we, the people of the United States, will at least send technology around the moon. There will be 3 mannequins that are all fully instrumented to measure all kinds of things, but there also will be a Snoopy. NASA and cutesy. That is just ridiculous. That's what that is. Absolutely ridiculous. By the way, they will be taking mementos from Apollo 11, which is not cutesy. Those are good omens. I hope they're talisman for what will be a successful flight in 11 days. Oh, that's going to be so cool. By the way, if it happens during the Wells Report, we're going to cover the launch live, just in case you're wondering. This has been the Wells Report. Thanks very much for listening and watching. Please subscribe. See you tomorrow. And just like that, we call it a day. All right, so what's going on? Snoopy going to the moon. I like it. I think it's cutesy. I think it's silly. All right. Have a wonderful evening. I certainly will. By gum golly gosh wowie kazowie. Thank you, Yvonne. Thanks for everything you do for this broadcast. Gary, thank you as well. I'll go do that thing here in just a couple of seconds. Let's see. It was all DOS, or was it Unix? It was actually before that. The actual memory was called rope memory. That's what they used to land the lunar lander on the moon. Yeah. It was pre-DOS. It was like crazy. It was so crazy that they were able to pull that off in the 70s is nothing more than amazing. All right. God bless all y'all. Take good care, okay? I've got some errands to run, and I'm going to go run those. Yeah. Jesse, I can't hate him much more. He's gotten away with much. Okay, whatever. Okay, I got to go. Thanks very much for your participation, Gary. Thank you again. And I'll talk to you guys later. Take good care. And until next time, have a fine time